My billionaire mother tried to ruin my love life, but I took everything from her instead. Welcome back with a new real shock story. Before we start, comment and tell me which city you're watching from. At the end, don't forget to subscribe and rate it from 0 to 10. Let's enjoy this story, everyone.
I grew up believing that love could fix anything. Maybe that was the biggest mistake of my life. When you're the daughter of a billionaire, people assume you have everything: freedom, comfort, choices. But I learned early that in my mother's world, money didn't buy freedom, it bought control. From the outside, our life looked perfect: mansions with glass walls, glittering parties, smiles polished like diamonds. But inside those walls, every smile was a transaction, every hug a bargain. My mother ruled everything, even the air we breathe. She called it protection. I called it a cage. And for years, I accepted it. I studied where she told me to, dressed how she wanted, smiled for photos I didn't want to take, until I met him, Daniel. He wasn't from our world. That was what made him real. He worked at a small bookstore downtown, the kind of place that smelled like dust and old stories. I met him by accident, or maybe fate. He bumped into me, spilled coffee on my coat, apologized with a nervous laugh that somehow felt warmer than any luxury I'd ever known. For the first time, someone saw me, not the name, not the money, just me. We started meeting secretly. I'd tell my driver I was volunteering, but really, I was stealing hours of freedom. Daniel made me believe I could be more than my mother's reflection. We talked about dreams, not investments, about kindness, not status. Every moment with him felt like breathing after years underwater. But peace never lasts long in my family. My mother noticed the change in me: the smiles that weren't for her, the sudden excuses to leave dinners early. One evening, she entered my room without knocking, holding my phone like a weapon. "Who is he?" she asked, voice sharp as glass. My stomach dropped. She had read our messages. Every word of love between us was now evidence in her court of power. I tried to explain, to tell her he was different, but she didn't hear. She never heard. The next day, Daniel lost his job. He didn't tell me right away. He didn't want to worry me. But I found out. My mother had called the bookstore's owner, offered a donation, and Daniel was quietly replaced. That was her way to destroy quietly, smile publicly. I begged her to stop. She said, "You're young, you don't understand. Love doesn't last, money does." I remember those words like a curse. I should have walked away, but I couldn't. Love makes you reckless. We kept meeting, hiding in corners of the city. My mother's people wouldn't think to look. Every time I saw him, I knew we were gambling with everything. But what I didn't know was that my mother wasn't finished. She was planning something far worse than losing his job. It started with whispers: friends, suddenly distant, family advisors asking strange questions. Then one morning, the tabloids exploded with headlines about Daniel I's ugly, fabricated stories that painted him as a con artist, someone using me for money, photos taken out of context, bank statements forged. My mother's publicist called it damage control. I called it destruction. Daniel tried to fight it. But how do you fight a woman who owns the media? He came to see me one last time, his eyes tired but kind. "You don't have to choose me," he said. "Just don't let her decide who you are." And then he left, walking out of my life into a storm I didn't know how to stop. That night I sat in my room, surrounded by silence that smelled like perfume and power. For the first time, I saw my mother not as a parent, but as a rival. She had taken away the only person who ever made me feel real. And in that moment, something inside me broke and then hardened. If she wanted a war, I would give her one. I didn't know how yet, but I knew this: she had all the money, all the influence. The only thing she didn't have anymore was my obedience. And she had no idea what I was capable of when I stopped being afraid. When morning came, the sun felt wrong. It touched the marble floors and the glass walls, but it couldn't reach me. I had spent the night sitting by the window, replaying every word Daniel had said, every look my mother had given. Somewhere between the moon and the dawn, I stopped crying. I started thinking, I knew my mother's empire better than anyone. Her wealth came from more than investments. It came from secrets. She built it on control and making people owe her, fear her, or adore her. And I had been the perfect daughter, the soft face for her hard world. Until now, I started small. I still went to her meetings, smiled when the cameras flashed. But I listened. Every whispered deal, every name mentioned twice. I wrote it down in my mind. Her world was made of paper walls. I just needed to find where to push. Then, almost by accident, I found it. In her office, there was a drawer she never let anyone touch. One night she left in a hurry for a gala, and I was alone. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside were folders, contracts, letters, bank records, some in her name, some not, but one folder caught me. It had Daniel's name on it. I opened it and my breath stopped. There was a document showing a transfer of payoff to the tabloids for the fake stories, signed by one of her assistants. Attached was a note in her handwriting: "Ensure this ends quietly." That was the moment the fear vanished completely. She hadn't just tried to protect me. She had destroyed an innocent man for the sake of control. And if she could do that to someone I loved, what else had she done to everyone who crossed her? I took pictures of everything, every document, every email. It felt like stealing air from her lungs. The next day, I acted as if nothing had happened. I even laughed at breakfast. She thought I was healing. Really, I was collecting. Weeks went by. I gathered enough proof to crumble the foundation of her empire. But revenge wasn't just about exposure, it was about timing. I needed the right moment. That moment came sooner than I expected. My mother was being honored at a charity gala, live on television, the perfect stage for her favorite performance, the devoted philanthropist, the loving mother. Cameras, reporters, champagne. I attended, dressed in gold, standing beside her like a jewel she owned. When she started her speech about family values, I felt my hands tremble. I remembered Daniel's voice: "Don't let her decide who you are." So I didn't. As she smiled at the crowd, I stepped onto the stage. The room froze. I took the microphone from her hand and said, "There's something the world should know about the woman you're celebrating tonight." Gasps, whispers, cameras flashing. My mother's face didn't move, but her eyes screamed. I showed the files on the big screen behind us, proof of the bribes, the lies, the way she destroyed people who got in her way. For a moment, the mighty queen of our world looked small. Security tried to intervene, but the story was already out. Reporters rushed forward. I walked away from the stage and didn't look back. Outside, the air felt cold and new, but victory is never clean. By the time I reached my car, my phone was full of messages, some praising me, others threatening. I had set fire to her empire, but part of me still felt the ashes landing on my own skin, because she was still my mother, and love doesn't disappear just because it's poisoned. That night, as I watched the news replay the moment again and again, I realized something. I hadn't just taken her secrets, I had taken her power, and in her world, that was the one thing worth more than money. Still, I couldn't shake one thought: how far would she go to take it back? The fallout came faster than I expected. Within hours, our family's name was everywhere. News anchors said scandal like it was perfume. Social feeds burned with headlines and half-truths. My mother's portrait, the perfect smile, the diamond eyes, flashed on every screen beside the word corruption. I watched it all from a small apartment downtown, the one place I thought she'd never find me. The city outside was loud, but my room was too quiet. I hadn't spoken to anyone since the gala. Part of me thought she would call, that she would scream or beg, or at least explain, but she didn't. Silence was her weapon now. Then the messages started coming in: anonymous numbers, veiled threats. "You don't know what you've done. She'll destroy you." I told myself I wasn't afraid, but my hands still shook whenever the phone buzzed. 3 days later, a letter arrived. No return address, just my name in her handwriting. Inside was a single line: "You wanted independence. Now live with it." No apology, no denial, just cold dismissal. It stung worse than rage. Money disappeared from my accounts overnight. Credit cards declined. I realized she'd cut me off completely. For a woman who measured love and control, this was her final punishment, erasing me. I took a job at a small cafe to pay rent. The first morning, the manager handed me an apron and smiled like he didn't know or care who I used to be. It was humbling, terrifying, and somehow freeing. For the first time in my life, I earned something on my own. The smell of coffee, the hum of chatter, the clink of cups, it felt honest. Still. At night, I'd sit by the window and wonder what she was planning, because my mother never lost quietly. And then, one evening, I saw her on television again. She had survived the scandal. She'd given an interview.com and poised, calling it a family misunderstanding. Somehow, she'd turned sympathy back toward herself. That's when I understood the war wasn't over. She wasn't just protecting her name. She was rewriting the story. I had wounded her pride, not destroyed her. And if she could rebuild from the ashes, she'd make sure I was buried under them. A week later, a man in a suit came into the cafe. He ordered tea, but his eyes never left me. When he left, he placed a business card on the counter. "Let's talk about your future." M. I froze. The letter M, my mother's initial. I didn't call. I couldn't. But that night, someone knocked on my apartment door, 3 slow knocks, then silence. I didn't open it. The next morning, the card was gone from my table. Fear crept back in, wrapping around my new life. Every shadow felt watched, every footstep behind me too close. I began keeping my phone off, walking different routes home, glancing over my shoulder. One night, I returned home to find the door slightly open. Inside, nothing was stolen, but on the kitchen counter sat another envelope. Inside was a photograph of me at work, taken from outside the cafe window, and a note, "You can't hide from blood." That was the moment I realized this wasn't just about power anymore. My mother wasn't trying to win, she was trying to erase me completely. But she underestimated one thing. Fear had already burned away. I wasn't the obedient daughter anymore. I was the ghost she'd created. And ghosts don't die easily. So I started planning again. This time, not to expose her, but to end the game on my own terms. For days after the note appeared, I barely slept. Every sound made me flinch. Every face in the crowd felt like a shadow sent to follow me. But somewhere between the fear and exhaustion, a strange calm began to grow inside me. Maybe it was acceptance, or maybe it was something darker. I realized she could take everything from me, but she could no longer scare me. That night, I sat down and opened my laptop. If my mother wanted a war, she was going to get one she couldn't control. I still had the files I had copied before the Galafa, the proof of her corruption, the bank records, the forged donations. I hadn't released all of it, only enough to shake her. The rest, I had kept as insurance. I spent hours studying every document, looking for a pattern, a weakness. Then I found something I'd missed before: a chain of offshore accounts tied not just to her name, but to companies that didn't exist. She wasn't just hiding money, she was hiding crimes. And if I could trace them, I could end her empire for good. I reached out to an investigative journalist I trusted. I didn't tell him my name at first, just sent anonymous evidence. He replied within minutes. "If this is real, it's the biggest story of the year." The plan was simple. Expose her fully, in a way she couldn't twist. I knew it meant destroying the only family I had left. But after everything she had done, she wasn't really family anymore. Days passed quietly, too quietly. Then, one morning, as I was leaving the cafe, I noticed a black car parked across the street. The same car appeared again that evening, and again the next day. I knew that car. It was from my mother's security team. She knew what I was doing. That night, I received a call from an unknown number. A familiar voice said, "Alec, stop this before you get hurt." And then silence. My heart pounded, but I didn't stop. Fear was her weapon. Defiance was mine. I sent the final files to the journalist. Everything, it was out of my hands now. The next morning, the headlines exploded again. Not about me this time, but about her. The hidden accounts, the bribes, the offshore money, it was all there. Undeniable. Impossible to bury. I watched the news unfold from my small apartment. Her empire crumbled in real time. Business partners fled. Lawyers resigned. Her mansion surrounded by reporters. For years she had bought the world's silence. And now the world was speaking all at once. But the victory didn't feel sweet. My phone rang again. This time a familiar number. I hadn't heard his voice since that last night we said goodbye. "I saw the news," he said quietly. "You finally did it." For a moment, I couldn't speak. Everything I'd fought for, justice, truth, revenge, suddenly felt heavier. "She took everything from us," I whispered. "I just took it back." He was silent for a long time. Then he said, "Maybe now you can finally start living." When the call ended, I realized my hands were trembling. Not from fear, but from release. The story wasn't over, but the war was. Or at least, that's what I thought. Because the next morning, I woke to find my apartment door slightly open, again, and on the table, a single envelope. No name, no words inside, just a single photograph. It was me, standing at Daniel's bookstore the day we first met. She still had eyes everywhere. The photo haunted me. It wasn't just that someone had taken it, was the message behind it. My mother wanted me to know she still had control, even from the ruins of her empire. The walls around her might have fallen, but she was still watching, still waiting. I thought about leaving the city, disappearing somewhere far away, but something inside me resisted. I had spent too many years running from her, from the truth, from myself. If I ran now, I'd never stop. So, instead, I decided to face her one last time. I called the only number I still had for her old assistant. A woman named Clara who'd once slipped me kind smiles when no one else dared. When Clara answered, her voice was tired. "Alec," she said softly, "she's been asking about you." "I know," I replied. "Tell her I'm coming." 2 days later, I stood outside the mansion I'd once called home. The gates were open, but the guards were gone. The house looked smaller than I remembered, colder somehow. The silence felt heavy, like the air before a storm. Inside, I found her in the study, the same place where she used to plan her next business move. As I watched from the doorway as a child, she was sitting by the window, staring at the garden, her reflection broken across the glass. "You came," she said without turning. Her voice was calm, too calm. "I needed to," I answered, "to see what's left." She finally looked at me. Her eyes, once sharp and commanding, seemed tired but still dangerous. "You've done enough damage, Alec." I stepped closer. "No, Mother. You did. I just showed the world what you really are." For a moment, she said nothing. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she asked, "Do you hate me?" The question hit me harder than any accusation. I didn't know how to answer. Hate was easy. This was something deeper, something mixed with grief, love, and loss. "I don't know," I said, "but I know I don't want to be like you." Her lips trembled slightly, and for the first time, she looked fragile. "You're stronger than I thought," she murmured. "No," I said quietly. "You just never thought I could be." The silence stretched between us, thick and strange. I could feel years of unspoken words hanging in the air. I wanted her to apologize, to say she was sorry for everything, for Daniel, for the lies, for trying to own my life. But she didn't. Maybe she couldn't. When I turned to leave, she said one last thing. "You think you've won, Alec, but you'll learn power always finds a way back." I didn't answer. I just walked out. For once, her words didn't scare me. I didn't need power anymore. I had peace. Outside, the wind was cold, but it felt clean. I looked back at the house, her empire of glass and gold, and realized it was just a shell now, a monument to everything she'd lost. That night, I packed my things and left the city for good. No security, no cameras, no money that wasn't my own. Just me and a quiet sense of freedom I hadn't felt in years. But even as I drove away, I couldn't shake one last thought. Sometimes, destroying the monster means breaking the mirror too, and I wasn't sure which pieces of her still lived inside me. I left the city before sunrise. The skyline faded behind me like a memory I was finally ready to let go of. Every mile between me and that house felt lighter, even though my heart was still heavy. For the first time in years, no one was calling, no one was giving orders, no one was watching, just silence, real silence. At first, it felt strange. I'd been raised to believe that silence meant failure. My mother filled every moment with noise, deals, plans, parties, people. She was terrified of stillness. Maybe that's why I needed it so badly. I drove until I reached the coast, a quiet town where no one knew my name. I rented a small apartment overlooking the ocean. It wasn't luxury. The walls were cracked, the furniture secondhand, but it was mine. I learned how to cook my own meals, fix my own broken things, and sleep without fear of being watched. Freedom, it turns out, isn't loud, it's quiet. For weeks, I stayed off the grid. But one evening, as the sun melted into the sea, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. Just a photo. My mother, leaving a courthouse, her head bowed, surrounded by flashing cameras. The caption from a news site read, "Former magnate sentenced to house arrest after plea deal." I stared at it for a long time. I should have felt triumph, but I didn't. I just felt sad. Sad that everything we could have been, mother and daughter, not enemies, had vanished under the weight of greed and pride. The next day, I walked to the edge of the pier and let the wind tangle my hair. I thought about Daniel, how he'd once said that maybe I could start living again. I wondered if he'd ever forgive me for dragging him into my family's storm. Maybe someday I'd tell him the whole story, not for revenge, but for closure. As the waves crashed below, I realized something. My mother had spent her life trying to own people. I had spent mine trying to prove I couldn't be owned. Both of us were trapped in the same battle, just on opposite sides. And maybe, in a strange way, we had both lost. But loss isn't always defeat. Sometimes it's the price of freedom. Now, when I look back, I don't see a billionaire's daughter anymore. I see a survivor, a girl who learned that love can't be bought, and control isn't protection, a girl who walked away from everything and finally found herself. And if you're listening to this, maybe you understand what I mean. Maybe you've had someone try to control your life, make you doubt your worth. If you have, remember this: they can take your money, your reputation, even your comfort. But they can't take you. That's the one thing no one can buy, steal, or destroy.